It's the Conquest Sorcerer Kings week, and with a comment, you could win an amazing box set. We will choose 3 winners. 1 from YouTube, 1 from OnTableTop.com, and 1 from our Cult of Games members. So you guys get an extra chance to win.
Hello everyone and welcome to 3 Colors Up. In this one I'm going to take the Rakshasa from Para Bellum for Conquest for the Sorcerer Kings faction, and we're going to paint him up. He is quite the lad. He is quite the chunky lad, and I went for a tiger sort of head option on it. So we cover stuff like tiger skin, painting a few stripes, a little bit of flame work, golds, nice bright colors and stuff like that to try and keep with that sort of Hinduist kind of culture that the Rakshasa is from. So I did do a little bit of a lore dive on what the Rakshasa was, just to try and get my head in on what this incredible looking beast is. So this guy's a lot of fun to paint. A lot of time consuming moments where it's just doing the same color over and over again. So hopefully I've kept this one short and to the point. Fair bit of airbrushing to support the likes of the skin and the flames as well, but you'll see that as we go along. Anyway, let's sit back, relax, and let's paint a Rakshasa. So to begin with on the Rakshasa, we have him down on a little tin because this nice weight is going to keep him nice and balanced as I work with him. As you can see, the model is pretty intense. There's a lot of detail, there's a lot of parts all over the place. And what I want to do first, obviously, is prime. So I'm going to be using some Stynylrez Res black primer for this. And because this model has this big bit of fire on the top, I've decided to leave this unglued. So what I can do is remove this and I can paint it separately. That way, we're free to work on the model as best we can without that fire getting in the way. And we can paint in behind all those details as well. And then when we come to do the fire, we can do that separately and make it more interesting. So the first thing we're going to do is airbrush our primer. I am using a new airbrush. This is a Harder Steinbach Ultra, and it looked like a good budget brush for beginners. And I thought, well, it's worth having a nice higher quality airbrush for some more detail work. But for now, we're going to prime him in black and then see what we can do after that. We're probably going to start with the skin and work our way out. So with the model primed, we're going to move on to our first stage of color, and that is going to be our fur. So what I'm going to do is base coat the fur using my airbrush with Demigod Flames from the Armory Painter Fanatic range. This should be a nice solid sort of orange that I want, that I can then sort of lighten over the top of it. It's on the yellow scale there, you can see on the bottle, and that's going to look good, I think, as the base for the tiger's orange fur. And yeah, after that, I think we're just going to try and highlight that up a little bit as we go. So let's see what happens when we start applying this. Again, we're airbrushing this, so it's just to pick out all the skin and just get the orange down, then we can talk about other colors afterwards. With the Demigod Flames down as the base coat for the fur, we have quite a nice rich colour there, and the airbrushing has allowed me to sort of feather it around some of the shadows and the recesses a little bit. So what we're going to do now is lighten this fur up, and what we're doing is using the same Demigod Flames, but we're mixing in some pale sand this time as well, just to lighten the tone a little bit. So let's have a look, and let's start working on the more exposed areas, so up on the face and the skin. We're sort of trying to create a little bit of hot spotting just to make it a bit more interesting and add a bit more depth. So with the orange done and hot spotted a little bit, it's time we can move on to the lighter fur. So There's going to be areas under the chin and along the sides there, as well as probably down the chest. And it's just going to be a case of picking those areas out. And what we're going to be doing for that is just the thinner we were using before, the pale sand. So we have that in the airbrush again, and we're just going to give it a go and see what happens. So let's see, we'll try by starting, I think, under the chin here. So with the white areas now done, I'm going to move on, or what I have done, sorry, off camera, is given everything a coat of gloss varnish. All the skin has been given a coat of gloss varnish. And from here, we're going to move on to shading the orange a little bit, because I feel like it's a little too pale, and we're going to need to add a little depth before we start painting our stripes and stuff on. So what I'm using is the Fanatic Range Orange Tone, with a little bit of wash medium mixed into that as well, just to thin it down a little and allow it to flow. And that's what the gloss varnish is also going to do, as well as allowing the existing paint not to get stained by this. So the idea is that we're applying this a little bit carefully, he says. We want to avoid the areas that have been done in white, but we want to be able to shade the areas that are already orange. So just work in there and see how we get on here. All we're looking for is a little bit of depth. And then we'll probably have to end up doing something similar on the white, perhaps. I'm not sure yet, but we can get there in due time. But we need the orange at least before we shade, or before we paint stripes over it. I think when that dries on the face, that's going to look quite good. So I'm going to continue with the rest of the model, get the rest of the orange sort of shaded in a little bit, and then after that, we can look at some stripes. So now we have the orange wash down. It just adds a little bit more depth to our big Rakshasa here. It's a little bit unsubtle, but I think, again, from working from tabletop distance, I think we're going to get away with that just fine. Now we're going to move on to probably the most complicated part of the miniature, and that is going to be his patterning, because I chose to do a tiger, and tigers are pretty complicated in as far as their pattern goes. So I have this reference image here I'm going to be trying to work from, and the color I'm using is a mixture of matte black but with a drop of uniform grey in there as well, just to take away from the starkness of the black. I don't want it to be as deep as a standard black would be, so I wanted it to be just a little bit off. And it's finding an area to start. And I think there's plenty of complicated stuff going on a tiger's face, and if I can nail the face, then I can calm myself down a little bit. So I'm just going off the reference image, just going to take a little bit of the color just here, and that sort of widens up a little bit. We'll let it disappear into the headdress a bit, I think. Then we get a sort of second bit of a heavier stripe there, and then it kind of matches, it kind of has a little bit of a patterning that goes across like that. And it's going to be a case of going around the miniature and just, as best as possible, trying to figure out where these stripes are going to go and how they're going to work. So for example, up here will be okay for now. Then we have like a sort of a larger kind of tuft that almost comes to meet the edge of the eye. Like that. And then we're just going to start patterning the whole face up as best we can. While we're at this as well, we're going to do the lips, because a lot of this is sort of a black skin, and in and around the eyes is black as well. So I'm just going to be, I'm sort of just going to be making this up as I go along using the reference image that I have. I'm applying the paint in small little strokes just to try and feather the edges a little bit. So we'll see how that comes on, and when we come back we'll have the stripes done and any other bits that need to go black. It's just going to be a long process, but I think it's going to be worth it, and having chosen a tiger base for my Rakshasa, I think it's just going to be the way to do it. So long, slow process here, plenty of water on the brush, making sure the paint doesn't dry up on me as we go along. Probably would have been an ideal time for a wet palette, but we'll carry on and we will see what we come up with. So with the stripes done and the other black details done, what I did was go ahead and re-prime with my base black primer all the parts that weren't skin or all the parts that still need color. That way it gives me a better idea of how the miniature looks, and I think minimalist on the stripes is working out fine. He doesn't have a lot of skin, and on the back here, remember, we have the big fire, so other than that there would have been a lot of stripes there. It's more important to get the feel of it, and I think he looks like a tiger at least. You know, he's got plenty of stuff going on the face. There's a couple of stripes where there need to be, like on the leg there, but apart from that I think he looks pretty good. So what I want to do now is paint the eyes, and for the eyes I'm just going on metallic. I'm just going to use bright gold here because they are sort of an ambery orange kind of bright eye anyway, so I want to emphasize how bright those eyes are. And as you can see, I've painted them black as well because the outer part of the eyeball, if any of it remains, is going to be let me see if I can get a bit closer here, is going to be black anyway. So we're just going to paint the eyeball with the bright gold. Just carefully as possible. Something like that. And then round on the other side as well. This is always the part that messes me up personally, so. Not quite consistent, not my best work. I'll try to add a bit more here. That's probably closer, and then on this one I'm going to need to change my angle here a bit. I think once those have a couple of pupils in them, they should look fine. Now, while that is drying, we can move on to the tongue and the mouth, and for that we're going to use elderflower, sort of a nice skinny sort of purple pink. And I'll put some of that down onto my palette real quick. So I'm now using a little palette just to make sure I'm keeping things right. This will also go on to the bit of flesh there just at the front of the jaw. So let's just go on ahead and do that. And what we're trying to do here is coat everything as far into the mouth as possible, as well as the tongue there. And then this little bit of skin here, because it's not black like the rest of the gums are. And then we're also going to go ahead and do that on the nose. So we'll do that, we'll get that all sorted. When that's dry, we'll come back and we'll shade that down a little bit, and I'll make sure my eyes are done proper after that. So while we're waiting for that pink to dry, we're going to take a little bit of matte black. I'm going to drop some of that onto my palette real quick, and we're just going to dot the eyes, so to speak. And we'll just get a little bit onto the tip of my brush. and then let the pain commence, because I am terrible with eyes. So we want a pupil in the middle of the eye. About there. I could have used a pen for this, to be fair, but I'm not going to. That looks all right. That's okay for one side. Now, can we do the same on the other side? That's the problem. Well, I've certainly done worse. I have certainly done a lot worse. I think that will do for the eyes. I don't really want to spend a lot of time on that. So the next thing I want to do is base coat his teeth. And for that, I'm going to use a very pale skin tone, quartz skin, because it looks quite nice and quite ivory sort of color. And this is going to be the first step, and then we're going to wash everything in the maw and then come back and do a little bit of highlighting on the teeth. So we'll do the quartz skin first. With everything there base coated, we're going to move on to a wash, and for that I'm going to use strong skin tone. This is very similar, or looks very similar at least, to the standard Army Painter strong tone. So it's going to be a little dark, but what I'm going to try and do is apply it quite thinly, give everything a nice thin coat of this stuff. So let's start with the tongue and see what it does for us there. So it is quite brown in the recess, but that's okay. We can make sure that it doesn't pull too much. And then we'll carry that up into the jaw. So let's work it into the jaw and around the teeth. Doesn't matter if we carry it up onto that black either, that's going to do basically nothing to that color anyway. But it's just giving us that little bit of shade to blend all these colors and these details together. The way it's pulling at the bottom of the tongue is a little not what we want. And then what I want to do is take it a little less diluted into the back of the mouth, because the mouth does have detail, but we can emphasize it a little bit more through the wash. And it is very awkward to get to, so it's just a case of getting in there as best we can. We want it to pull in the ridges and the roof of the mouth, and we want to pull it towards the back of the tongue a little bit. Seems I'm lifting some of the paint there away as well, so we'll not concern ourselves too much more with that. We'll let that do what it wants to do. Then we need to do a little bit on the nose as well. Carry that into the shape of the nose. And that just emphasizes the shape and shades that a little bit more. Makes it a bit more interesting looking. So yeah, he's looking quite fearsome now. I'm happy with that. See if there's any bits I haven't done yet. Any bits that just need a little bit more. And because we're sort of in that same sort of color palette at the minute, what I can do is add a little bit of shade in and around the eyes. It probably isn't going to help too much, but it is going to add something in there. My painting skills always leave eyes looking a little derpy, so anything to tidy that up a touch is just going to be an improvement. I do apologize for that, it's not very good. Right, what we need to do now is let that dry, and then when we come back we can start to highlight the teeth, and we'll highlight the tongue a little bit as well. Now that the wash is dry, we can go back over the tongue with the base color, and we can also go over the teeth with another color. So let's just do the tongue first and see what we got. So what I kind of want to do is just layer back up again. Be careful not to hit anything important. That. A little bit in there. And that's really all I want to do on the tongue. Just layer it up, tidy it up a little bit. And then on the teeth, we're returning to our pale sand, which we used for the fur, and we're going to use that just to brighten those teeth up a little bit. So yeah, I make sure I have a good shot at this. And all I want to do is just try like that, and then just leave a little bit of that other color with the wash on it at the base of the tooth. Like so. And then for the smaller teeth back here, just a little bit there, a little bit there, and around the side, we'll just add just a few little bits like that. Round on the front, I want to make sure we're continuing this color up to about there. I think that pretty much finishes the face. Okay, yeah, the pupils are a little bit derpy, but I like what we've got with the mouth. Nice, quite vivid contrast there, even against that bright orange for the fur. So, with that done, there's a couple of base coating steps I want to do now to move on a little bit. So let me just grab the two colors that we're going for. These colors were dictated by good old Jerry himself, so if it doesn't look right, we're going to blame him. So we have some cloth that we want to do. So we have these straps that go over the shoulders and this sash, as well as a kilt and then a little bit of a tabard. So what I want to do for the sash, the straps and the little tabard is I want to go with Warlock Magenta, nice sort of purplish sort of color. For the kilt that he's wearing, which is this bit right down underneath all here as well, I'm going to go with Talisman Teal. We're going to mix these colors up because they look quite nice, and because this character in particular, because the Rakshasa is very much a Indian mythical beast, Jerry and I kind of decided that we really wanted something that was a bit more traditional looking or a bit more vivid, that sort of Indian theme. So we're going to base coat the cloth in that, and then when we come back, we'll look at washes and then layering them back up again. So as you can see, we have our purple and our teal now down on the cloth, and it gives him a lot of nice brightness. You can see there's a few bits there that I've not touched. They're going to be a different color later on, but overall, it's made the model a lot brighter and a lot more interesting looking. So we need to shade these. So for the teal, I'm going with a green tone, and for the purple, no surprise, I'm going for a purple tone. It's a shame there isn't a teal tone, Army Painter, listen. So I think the green tone, a bit thin down because it's quite a heavy wash. I think if we thin it down a bit, we'll get some good shading in there, so let's try it out. Let's see what happens, shall we? Because we can only mess it up and then do it again, so it's not going to be that big a deal. And what I'm looking to do is try and get it into as much of the folds of the cloth as possible. Now that's a little bit difficult because the actual folds on the material are quite soft, which is a bit of a pain, but we can work on it. We'll maybe do some targeted areas as well once we put this first layer down. And I really want to try and put it down in such a way that when we start layering it back up to the original teal, that we can do it in a way that makes the cloth look a bit more interesting. So we're not just fighting with stuff like here where there is a join point between two parts. That's a bit annoying, but let's see what we do. So we'll do this on the teal and then we'll do the purple on the purple. And once that's done, we'll see what we've got and then we can start layering it back up. With our washes down, we can see now how the teal and the purple are shaded. It's a little bit messy in certain spots here, but I'm kind of hoping that our next step will tidy that up. What we're going to do now is take our base colors, so that'll be our Warlock Magenta and our Talisman Teal, and we're going to layer up the two areas of cloth. So let me just move that out of the way because that's getting a bit annoying. And what we're wanting to do is just take our base color, and maybe a little bit more tidier than that, John, goodness sake, and sort of just layer up the higher points of this cloth again and let the shading remain in the recesses, in the darker folds of the cloth. That way we're going to get something a bit cleaner and a bit more interesting looking. So we're going to do this across both and just tidy that cloth up a little bit now. So with the cloth layered back up to its base color after the wash, we can see that it's a little bit messy in places. It's a little, I definitely did go a little heavy on the wash, but what we have is a bit more definition and a bit more forced shadow in there. So that's fine. That's more or less what I'm aiming for. Remember, we're doing this for the tabletop. I have to remind myself that sometimes when I really get into a miniature and I'm like, oh, I really want to paint this. Anyway, we're going to move on now. We're changing our gear and we're going to be moving from the cloth and we're going to go to our metals. So the first one we want to do is our silvers, because this sort of Hindu, Indian kind of feel has a lot of silvers and a lot of golds, particularly an emphasis on the golds, but we do need some silver. And for that, we're going to be using our Fanatic Paint Mithril. And what we're going to be doing with this is colouring in everything that's going to be metal, whether it's going to be gold or remain silver. We're going to do it all in that now, including our sword blades and stuff like that. We're going to do that because we can then just paint over the bits that we want gold afterwards. So, for example, this whole hand piece, so all of this and all of this up here, and you can already see that these Fanatic paints, just that metallic just works so nice. You're going to need a couple of coats, but at the same time, it goes down very, very smooth. It's got lovely pigmentation in there too. So we're going to do all that, get all the silver done, then we're going to give it a wash. Once we have the wash down, we'll then look at putting our gold detail down, and then we can wash that too. But for now, we're going to work on our silver and just block it all out. Alright, so we have our mithril down and we can quickly have a look at what we've done and just picked out areas that I want to be silver. And I did start blocking out the areas where I thought gold would go as well, but instead I sort of lined out areas that I wanted to maybe have some gold on them, but I wasn't decided yet or what way they were going to be. So what we're going to move on to now is shading our mithril down, and for that we're going to be using the standard Army Painter Quick Shade Dark Tone, because its current formula is just really good. So we're going to start applying that, and we're going to do it over all of our silver detail. So we're just going to go in and just apply it all over everything we've just done, and then once that's done, we'll either move on to the gold, or we will tidy up the silver. So we'll see what it looks like when it's done. So with the dark tone now on all our silver, we can see that that's adding a good bit more interest and definition to all those parts. That mithril is a really nice silver. I think our gold now is going to really sort of set him off. I think it's going to really sort of set him off. So we're going to do greedy gold for all the other parts of his armor and all the other nice little details that he has. So I have a bit of that on my palette, and it's going to be the same as the silver step. We're going to be blocking it all in now, making sure that we're going to be neat. And we're probably going to need a couple of coats of the gold as well. But this is a nice rich gold, and I think it's going to suit very nicely. And when it's all done and washed, we're going to have a very nice miniature. So let's block in all our gold now. And when we come back, we'll see what we need to do to shade it. So now we have all the gold down. As you can see, there is quite a lot of it. It's all over the guy, but that's done. That's about 2 coats on each part that was going gold. So what we need to do now is to start and tone this gold down. And hopefully this won't be as long a process as it was painting the gold initially. So what we're going with is the Warpaint's Fanatic Light Tone. I think this should be quite good because it's kind of an ambery sort of color. So what we'll do is we'll just have a little go here on a piece on his arm there, and let's see if we can just get it to tone in nicely without going over the top. I think that's going to look quite good. So here we go with another long step, making sure that we have all our gold now washed and shaded in. So with the gold shaded down a little bit, I really only went into the areas that were more apparent. So up along the headdress and this big fan back here, and a few other of the larger golden pieces, just to tone them down a little bit. And I think we've got something that's looking a little more rich and a little more interesting. What we're going to do now is move back to our mithril that we used before. And we're going to do a very light, a very quick dry brush. And we're just going to be doing that. First off, anyway, we're going to do that over our sword blades. So let's hold a sword blade in place. And let's try and tidy the look of them up a little bit after their shading. So a little bit of that. Just brightens that steel look up a little bit. It's not too much, but that's fine. So we're going to be doing that over all the blades. And then we're going to be taking a smaller brush, and on certain parts, particularly like the headdress and this piece here, we're going to repaint those in mithril. Because what we're going to do when that's dry is we're going to go back in with some blood effect and make it into gems and stuff like that. So up there, this little row here. And what it's going to do for us is just add a little more visual interest to certain parts of the model. That way we're getting another color involved here. We're getting a nice rich glossy kind of red look. So from here, dry brushing the swords and painting in the areas that we want to be gems. Alright, so with the mithril all sorted and done, we're going to move on to coloring the gems. And this is going to be the last step for the main body. We're going to move on to the flame effects after this. So what we need is True Blood, and on my palette I've added a little bit of water to the gel because it's quite a thick sort of color. So let's look at this gem on the top of the headdress here. And what we're trying to do is to let the silver underneath sort of speak for itself a little bit and brighten the red up. Something like that. It's maybe not the neatest, but it should be all right. And then it's just going to be a case of going over all those areas and just applying that red to each of the gems that we want. So with the big guy himself done, we're going to be moving on to the fire that's on his back. And it's a very complex shape. Bit of a pain to put together, but sure, it doesn't matter. And what I've done is primed it white. So I've given it a few coats of some airbrush white primer just to try and get into as many of the nooks and crannies as possible. So we're going to start toning this and we're going to start colouring it in. And the first one is going to be Inner Light, another Fanatic paint. And we have that in my airbrush thinned roughly 2:1. And this is going to be the sort of main base colour, but we want it to be quite light and flitty, so that's why we're using the airbrush. So let's see what we can do. I think if we concentrate the heaviest part of the yellow to the bottom, it's going to make a nice interaction between the more orange skin and sort of fade up into our oranges and our reds. I'm thinking of doing so. This stuff airbrushes really nicely, actually. It's obviously not meant for airbrush work, but it's doing okay. And what I'm trying to do is hit it from underneath so that we get a sort of underlit kind of look to it. And then as we move on, we can do different angles to different colors. Try and get it done as quickly as possible, but still make it look interesting. I think that should do for our yellow. So we'll let that dry, we'll clean the airbrush out, and then we'll move on to our next colour. With the airbrush cleaned out and our yellow pretty much dry after only a couple of minutes, because it's not really going to take a lot, there's not much paint there, we're moving on to our next shade, and for that we're returning to our orange tone that we used earlier, and we're going to airbrush that on. And hopefully we're going to get a nice interaction between the yellow and the orange as we airbrush this on. So let's check the airbrush is ready. It is. So let's see what happens. You can see we're hitting it more at a flat angle this time because we're trying to get that interaction between the yellow and the orange, but also let the orange hit in different places. We don't want to overdo or overspray the yellow too much. And what we're getting so far looks quite interesting. It's quite warm looking, which is definitely what you want with fire. Also, with airbrushing a wash, it is allowing it to move a little bit into some of the details. So when you overspray a little bit into certain areas, it will start to pull like the wash is supposed to. I think that should do for the orange. And because we've pretty much emptied the airbrush, just make sure it is empty, yep, we can just move straight on to our next one, which is red tone. So we're going to put some of that into the airbrush, again, spraying it neat. And hopefully, if we spray this from a more top down, we're going to get quite a decent look without doing too much. And with this orange already being, still being damp in places, it should again cause a little bit of natural blending and stuff as we go along. So let's see what happens. So what we're getting is okay, but the problem is that the red going down over the white primer is making it look a little pinky, a little peachy. So it's a case of, do we proceed or do we try something else? And what I'm kind of thinking of is going back, just on the fly here, we're kind of just painting on the fly, a little bit of True Blood into the red wash mix just to hammer home that red tone a little bit. So I'm going to put a couple drops of that into the airbrush. I know it's very, very thick, so I'm going to do that with a few drops of red, and then we're going to take some acrylic thinner and sort of make something really thin, and let's see if we get anything more out of it. So I think it already looks a little bit more red than it did previously, but let's see if this works. So it certainly looks a bit more red. So here we go again. That's not the worst. What we will do now though is we're going to let that dry, see what it looks like when it's all set. I think it looks a bit more interesting now. It's a bit more, well, there's certainly more red in it, that's for sure. And it has a bit of an etheric quality to it, but again, we'll see what it's like when it's dry. I think it looks kind of funky, but we'll probably do a couple more things just to sort of hammer home that. Maybe forego some of those washes and go back to a couple of standard paints just to maybe tone it a little bit more. But let's see what happens after it's dry. All right, we've given the flames a little bit of time to dry, and what I've done now is prepped up some pure red for this one into my airbrush, and we're going to try and give it a little bit of a dusting of pure red just to sort of liven up the top part of the flame, because it is looking a little bit, well, bloody. So, here we go. Let's see what we can do here. All right, I think that is looking much better than it was. Let's see if maybe, well, we don't really want to darken the depths too much, but that's looking a lot more interesting. So what we're going to have to do next is, let me see, do I have any of that color sitting to hand? I will, I do. Just let me go grab it. It's on the other side of my studio, so that's fine. What I'm going to do now is take a little bit of matte black, which is my base airbrush primer that I'm using for the blacks. And what I'd like to do is sort of just, if I get it. Sorry about that. So I'm going to use my dry brush with a little bit of black, and what I'd like to do is just kind of work up a little bit on the edges of some of the tops of the flames. I work it down the side a little bit too, why not? Just to show a little bit of a smoky edge to some of our flame, but not too much. I don't think we'll do too much of this, because I do quite like how it looks as it is, and adding too much of this is probably going to ruin it, so I don't want to go too far on the effect. Maybe a little bit there. I want to keep the vibrancy of the yellows and the oranges as much as possible. All right, I think that's looking far more interesting than it was. That red's really helped, along with the true blood, the orange and the yellow. So we're going to let this dry fully, then we're going to glue it to the model. After that, the whole model is going to get a matte varnish just to tone everything in, and after that we'll stick it on display. I might use a turntable, and we'll see what the model's like complete. So with the flames attached, I gave the whole model a coat of matte varnish, and when I finished that I was like, uh-oh, I've missed something. So I have missed doing anything with the horns, and they're a little bit bland looking. It's alright on the swords, but on the horns it's a little bit more noticeable. So what we're going to do is dry brush up our horns and give them a little bit of a highlight, maybe give them another wash before we finish. The first one I'm going to do, we're going to start with Uniform Grey, and this one is going to be a sort of heavy-ish dry brush over the whole shape, the whole horn, so to speak, and we're just going to try and start working some of that detail out of the horns without going over any of the work we've already done. So we're going to try and do this quite heavily. And yes, I know I've also done some basing. You'll see on the other shot there, we'll talk about that at the end and tell you exactly what we did. But for now, let's work and focus on these horns and get a little bit more visual interest into them. With the Uniform Grey down, we now have much better looking horns. So we're going to have to get a little more, I'm going to leave that pun out, and we're going to use some Company Grey here, and this is going to be our second dry brush. This is going to focus entirely on a very light final sort of glinty highlight to it. And all I'm doing is using the same dry brush I did with the uniform grey, and I haven't cleaned it, which means I've dirtied the company grey just a little touch. So it's probably just a little bit darker than what it should be. However, that's going to serve us just fine for this step. So all we want to do is just a little bit here and there. And then maybe add a little bit more than that because that's a little too light. So for example, let's see along some of these sort of more vertical ridges and stuff here. Just a little bit there, like that. I think that looks all right. That gives us a little bit more. And then on this side, we need to put a bit more paint on the brush without smacking the camera. Make sure there's enough paint off the brush. Just a little right up to the head there. With that little touch of lighter grey, the last thing we're going to do is give the horns a little bit of a wash with some Army Painter Strong Tone. And this will just cull the stark black nature of the horns a bit. And will allow us to shade right into there. And then what we can do is draw it out along that shape. And then in underneath, and like that, just to bring back a little bit of our shadow. So we'll work it right up into there, on the top of the head, on that side, and then start bringing it in here. Just like that. I think that'll do rather nicely. So we're going to let all this dry, and then we'll come back and talk about our basing and have a look at the finished model all round. With the horns done and everything else sorted, we can now talk very briefly about the basing. The basing is a simple black undercoat covered with the Citadel Crackle Paint Agrelian Earth. After that, I mixed a little bit of Army Painter's wash medium with some terracotta colored pigment powder, and then just gave the base a wash, just dabbing the brush onto it and letting it dry. That's given me a nice dry cracked earth that matches the rest of the army that we've done. And overall, we now have our Rakshasa all finished, and I think he's looking pretty good. Nice, bright, vibrant fire. I love the tiger skin, how that turned out, and the metallics. Obviously you can go back in and do a little bit more highlighting or whatever you want after that. However, I think we have something that's going to sit in with this army very nicely, and it was an absolute pleasure to build and paint. So as always, thank you so much for watching. Take care, stay safe, and see you again very soon.
It's the Conquest Sorcerer Kings week, and with a comment, you could win an amazing box set. We will choose 3 winners. 1 from YouTube, 1 from OnTableTop.com, and 1 from our Cult of Games members. So you guys get an extra chance to win.
Go ahead and check out our other content on screen now. And while you're at it, why not hit subscribe and remember to ding our dong. Go on, you know you want to click it. Go on.